Welcome to Anglo-Romani with Pricey. I am Pricey and this is the series where I look at the Anglo-Romani paralanguage / dialect and my experiences of it growing up, and look at where these words came from and sort of put together a little bit of the history of the Roma people as they sort of migrated across. In today's video I am looking at just a few of the more common expressions that are said, some very common day-to-day things that like Roma people tend to say to each other either online or in person. 3 of these expressions today have very complicated histories, but the first one I'm going to look at does not. So let's get straight into it. So the first one I'm looking at today is the term Kushti Divvus. I didn't really grow up having Kushti Divvus said to me or saying it myself, but when I came online and found Roma using it to greet each other, I already knew the word Kushti, I already knew the word Divvus, and I put it together. It quite literally means good day. Same as you say bonjour, buongiorno, buenos dias, guten tag, dober dan, etc. As I mentioned quickly in the introduction, this term is very quick to trace. I've already looked at the term Kushti in a previous video on adjectives, so feel free to go check that one out if you haven't already to find out more about that particular word. So I will just break down the word Divvus today, and this is really simple. It comes from the Prakrit Divvus, I believe it's pronounced, maybe, and that in turn comes from the Sanskrit Divasha. I think that's how it's pronounced. I don't know, feel free to correct me. But yeah, very simple one, literally means good day. It's worth mentioning that because of my dad's habit of dropping H's from the beginning of some words and randomly putting them onto the beginning of other words, I grew up thinking that this was pronounced Howli, but then I later learned that it's actually pronounced Owli, and this is just my dad doing his typical thing of dropping H's and putting them elsewhere. This word is pretty much a general agreement, literally meaning yes, but the way that I've always used this, I don't know if this is the same across other Anglo-Romani people, I've always used it kind of like the same way you would use the word I if you're up north. Like, oh, I, yeah, like up north, Scottish, voting on something in Parliament, apparently. Yeah, I also use the word I myself in day-to-day speech. So, like, I and Owli are very interchangeable for me personally in a conversation. Now, I swear, with every passing video, some of these words are getting more and more difficult to research. I could find Owli on effectively every website that detailed anything about the Anglo-Romani paralanguage. Any list of words had Owli in it, including the Romany project, including all of the books that I've used thus far in this series, and I simply could not find anything that mentioned where Owli had come from. Everywhere talks about Owli, but doesn't really discuss its like whereabouts or its history or anything else. Like I say, I went back through every bit of literature that I've used in this series thus far, and I could find Owli quite a lot, and I could also occasionally find other words that were kind of similar, or just other words that meant yes, and these were like other or our or something like that, and they all began with this very open vowel sounds, this like either sort of a ow or a ah kind of thing, and a lot of them had a V afterwards, like a, so it'd be of, and then they would end in either like an A or an E or an I kind of sound. So there were some common threads, but every time I looked into these words, nothing was coming up. And because I suspected there was a Sanskrit connection, once I exhausted all of the regular literature that I've used so far, I literally started Googling for the word yes in different Indian languages, and what I found was that a bunch of them begin with either a ah sound or a ha sound, and there was even Telugu, which is very much the other end of India from where Romany sort of originated, that used something like avati or something along those lines, so that had that of sound, but I couldn't concretely prove that this wasn't simply a coincidence. I could just not find any link specifically relating any of this to the Romany language. And then eventually, after about a week of digging, I came across a book called Romano Lovell Lil by George Borrow from 1874 that finally mentioned the word Owli and also linked it to another word more directly. So Borrow writes that Owli comes from Avali, another word that I couldn't find any trace of anywhere, but fortunately one that he links back to an old Wallachian term, Aiva. I have no idea how to pronounce it. It's on the screen right now. Make of that what you will. But then, right above this, in the same sort of page in his little dictionary section in that book, is another word, Ava, one that I've come across in the Romany project, and he links this to a Sanskrit word, Ava. So we have two links now, both more concrete than I had found so far, and had completely different origin points. One in Wallachia, which is modern day Romania, which just goes to show how long ago this book was written, and the other one being very much Sanskrit. So suddenly I go from having no links to having two, and they both have a very similar sound, Ava and Aeva, whatever that is, but come from two very different places. Now remember how I said that I've always known Owli to be used in very much the same way that you would use I, which means effectively yes, but it's kind of more like really, or indeed, or evidently so. Just bear that in mind for this next bit. So looking at this Wallachian term aevia, or however it's pronounced, that means really in the adverb sense, like I really want to know where this word comes from, as opposed to really like an answer to a question. Aevia itself can be traced back to a Proto-Slavic aviti, which means to show or to inform, to reveal something. So again, not particularly close, but this Proto-Slavic word is a distant cousin to the Sanskrit word avis, meaning evidently or manifestly. All of this is a very tenuous link, but it's not impossible to imagine how we can end up at yes from this. So then let's look at this other link, the Sanskrit word Ava. Well, Ava has been found across so many different historical records, meaning slightly different things, and it's morphed into a lot of different things over the years, and even its origin point is disputed between two different etymologies. However, between 3,000 years ago and 3,500 years ago, there are historical records showing that this word meant indeed or truly. Truly, this is the closest link I can find to how Owli means yes. And what's really interesting on top of that is that none of the origin points of either the Sanskrit Ava nor the Wallachian Avia have any common ancestor when we get down to like the Proto-Indo-European level, which leaves this word being a real mystery, but I've done, I think, my best at trying to find this. If you know anything else, then please do let me know. Okay, this next word has been on one hell of a journey to end up meaning no in modern day Anglo-Romani, and it's because of this bloody complicated journey that I nearly gave up on this word and made a different video altogether. Now, right away, I knew that one of my ancestors at some point had completely butchered the pronunciation of what so many other Romani people say as kek, we say as Kaerka, which kind of felt like it might have come from a more sort of Nordic root than many of the other words in this series. But regardless whether I was looking up Kaerka or Kek, I was hitting dead ends everywhere. And then eventually I found something in Romany An Introduction by Yaron Matras. Now what I found in this book, Romany An Introduction, was not exactly easy to understand, and it will probably be even harder to just say it out loud and have it understood. So I will try my best to break this down into something that resembles Common English. So kek apparently started out as the compound kajek or kayak, I don't know how we're pronouncing this letter J in the middle of the word, and that in turn is, like I say, a compound of two different words, kaj or kai meaning any, and yek, which apparently is the Romany number 1, so literally anyone, but not any one person, like anyone as in things, anyone, just anything, effectively. Before I go on, the word kaj comes from the Prakrit kahim, which in turn is inherited from the Sanskrit kim, which in turn can be traced back to the Proto-Indo-European quos, and depending on how far you go back with this word, it either means who, what, where, which, that kind of thing. But the most recent of those words, the Prakrit kahim, makes its way into contemporary Hindi and Nepali as somewhere or anywhere. Yek, on the other hand, is probably the simplest part of this equation and probably one of the simplest words I've ever looked up, literally coming from the Sanskrit eka, also meaning one. So how is it the Prakrit word kajek, meaning quite literally anything, ends up going into the contemporary Anglo-Romani paralanguage as kek, which literally means no or nothing in different contexts and in different families? Well, Yaron Matras refers to what fellow linguist Victor Elshik calls a negative cline happening across the Sinti people in northwest Europe, in the Finnish Kale people, and indeed in Wales. Effectively, what's being referred to here is how a word relating to kek started out as some or any before going through this transformation from community to community and from sort of generation to generation, where people will say a phrase like, isn't there any, or is there not some, something like that, and then that in turn got moved into sort of the indirect negative, and then eventually the direct negative. So no, there isn't any, to just effectively no. Oh, Dordi. This word proved to be a real headache to learn about. Dordi is effectively an expression, a general expression. Now, if I had to specify further, I would say it really expresses surprise the best. Some sort of equivalents could be, oh geez, wow, bloody hell, that kind of thing. It's really concentrated in specifically the British Isles and in contemporary sort of US Roma culture, I've realized, but basically doesn't exist anywhere else. It's become so ubiquitous, in fact, that it's made its way into forums about, you know, American gypsies and stuff from like TLC and all that, and has even been used by some gorgers here and there. But for the second time in this series, I was not able to find anything at all that I could really pin this down to in terms of its history. And from here on, I actually get a little bit speculative in all the rest of what I'm about to say. The other word, by the way, is still chickly. I'm still having trouble finding the origin to that. So again, if you have any knowledge on this particular word, do let me know. But going back into Dordi, I've decided to press ahead and talk about the things that I have found in my research and give my sort of speculations as to where it could have come from. My first idea as to where Dordi came from is the Persian word dard, which apparently means pain or suffering, but can also mean annoyance. And I then kind of took maybe a potential idea that it could have been used much like the same way we would use the word oh shoot. But then the fact that there's no word that's similar found across mainland Europe that I could find leads me to think that this is probably not the case. Another thought I had is that it could have come from the Romani word dur, meaning far, which in turn comes from the Sanskrit dura, which in turn can be traced to the Proto-Indo-European dware, Whenever I say proto in front of something, by the way, that is linguists speculating at how a word may have sounded, but not, there are links. And this in turn has cognates in contemporary languages, including Hindi, Bengali, and Persian. And the D suffix could have been placed there as emphasis, something that you find across the Romany language at large generally. But again, why would it be missing from the rest of continental Romany, this word Dordi? Which then leaves me with the least satisfying but arguably most likely scenario, that this word is simply slang formed in the British Isles, possibly linked to Dordi, which is another root word for like dukkering, the contemporary word in the Romany community for fortune telling, which I guess, you know, you could be like imagining someone reading some gorgeous poem and saying Dordi, Dordi, Dordi as part of like some link to that, but I'm getting really speculative here, so I have no idea. If you know more about this word than I do, please do let me know. And with that, those are 4 expressions that you might typically find in a tourist's phrasebook, especially if those tourists were going to visit my family specifically. There are more, and indeed there was one that came up in a comment fairly recently, meaning thank you. Now I wanted to look at in this video, but I decided to keep it A, focused on my own personal experiences, and B, I thought maybe I might make a video somewhere down the line of other words that I have found in the comment sections of my videos, ones that I didn't know already. So I might do that somewhere down the line once I've sort of exhausted all the ones from my own brain. In any case, feel free to check out the rest of this series if you haven't already. Feel free to look at the rest of the channel for retro gaming if that's your thing, as well as occasionally music discussion and vlogging. And feel free to subscribe if you're into any of that stuff. Feel free to comment, say hi, and comment about any of the terms that have come up today, or indeed if you can help me to trace some of these very untraceable words to me, then that would be super helpful. And feel free to like the video, and until next time, have a good one.